Okay, I'm not even sure I need a microphone, do I? Fairly loud to begin with. That's what a hearing deficit will do for you, which you eventually get in this business after a decade or two, some kind of hearing deficit. Digital copyrights, broken system question mark. The implication is there's something broken, and yet so many of you are here that I know who work in the copyright industry that it can't be too broken, can it? But that's not for me to answer. It's for these fine panelists that we have, and I'm going to introduce them to you one by one very, very quickly, and if you don't know who they are, I'm sure you can look that up. Colin Rushing, here to my left, to your right, the General Counsel at SoundExchange. Tough job to take, given that the boss used to be the General Counsel at SoundExchange, my puppy, but Colin's taken it on. We have Sandra Astars, the Executive Director of the Copyright Alliance. So well positioned to be here. Darryl Ballantyne, the CEO and founder of LyricFind, I think is the only one on the panel who had to go out and get licenses to start a business and deal with the copyright system, so he's especially good for giving us testimony. We have Michael Drexler, BMI, digital strategy. You've got like 3 different areas: digital, strategic development, business affairs.
Business development and strategic
Stack
development.
them all up. It's a lot of responsibility you've got
right.
there. We've got Les Watkins here from Music Reports out in California. I think the head of business affairs, head of new business.
Whatever they tell me to do.
Something of that sort. Michael Petricone here from the Consumer Electronics Association. I think everybody knows him. Did I pronounce that right? Petricone? Okay, good. Jay Rosenthal, General Counsel at the National Music Publishers Association. That's your panel. They're here to debate, is copyright broken, or at least to get a good discussion going on here in the pit, as they call it. And I'm going to start with Sandra. I'm going to throw a question out to Sandra because she, being from the Copyright Alliance, can opine to some degree on what we want from copyright. I mean, if we're going to declare it broken or not broken, we need to know what we want from it. And your members, I'm sure, have a good sense of what they hope for from it, and especially from you. So if you could offer us your thoughts on what we want from copyright, what do we wish copyright were? That'll give us some sense of whether we're getting what we want.
Sure, absolutely. So the Copyright Alliance is a 501c3 and a 501c4 organization. We also have a foundation that does educational work, which is a 501c3. And
we can't let eyes glaze over. That means you're nonprofit.
No. We're nonprofit, so we
can you lobby?
We can do a limited amount of lobbying, and we do some lobbying. Yep. So we're an advocacy organization and an education organization, and we represent creators across the entire spectrum of creativity, so musicians along with other types of creators as well. And we tend
creators.
Creators.
Sounded like craters for a minute.
Craters.
I was only worried about that because that would indicate it's broken. But
no.
Creators across the spectrum.
That's for Michael to talk to. But so we represent creators, innovators across the spectrum. What we want from copyright. I mean, we tend to speak for the smaller individuals who don't have a voice necessarily in the bigger debates. People look at copyright from the perspective too frequently of big media companies, big technology companies, and like these titanic battles that take place between them. So when I look at copyright from the perspective of an individual, whether it's a musician, a photographer, an author, a songwriter, a music publisher that's a small business perhaps, we're looking at whether copyright empowers that person, whether copyright gives that person choice in how to use the work, and whether copyright allows that person to create and to thrive in their chosen field. Mm-hmm. And I think to some degree it's succeeding, and to some degree there are modifications that need to be made to help individuals succeed and thrive in their chosen areas as individuals and as small businesses.
Straight up, broken or not?
I don't think it's broken, but I think there's always room for improvement.
It needs some fixing, some renovation maybe?
Always room for improvement, as my parents told me. No matter what kind of report card I brought home, there was always room for improvement.
So who are your members?
Wow, I wish there were my parents.
So my members span from the biggest to the smallest creators. We have about 8,000 individual, grassroots advocates who are, individual photographers, authors, songwriters, and the like. who don't belong to any associations. We have trade association members. We have some corporate members. We have association members who are, membership associations who represent a lot of individuals. So our mission is to connect creators and to protect creative work.
Gotcha. Well, Petricone, or Petricone, rather, is the correct. Yes, well,
He gives a little, he takes
sometimes position you guys against one another, and yet I know you to be a man who supports creators, especially small-time innovators, artists, indie artists, etc. You've demonstrably provided them support through your work. Do you sit on the opposite side of the table from Sandra on this?
No,
Is copyright broken?
Well, first of all, everybody around this table, right? Number one, we all have a symbiotic relationship. Like, if we all thrive, then we all win, right?
Do you travel together? Do you?
Like often, yeah.
Is this a road show?
But our devices need content. Content succeeds and gets out there through our devices and our services. So it is symbiotic, and sometimes we bicker, but we're all trying to get to the same place. In terms of is copyright broken, I think your question was good. What is copyright? What do you want copyright to do?
What do your members want copyright to
All right.
do?
Well, I think first of all, we got to go back to the Constitution tells us what the founders wanted copyright to do, which is promote the progress of the useful arts, right? Which means incentivize more content being generated, more content being out there, and promote, the arts and get it out there. By that measure, things are doing okay, right? Because there are more songs being created than ever before. There's more art being created than ever before. There are, by a lot of measures, an increasing amount of money coming into the music ecosystem.
Is that just because there's more people?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for it, and then the monies go to different places. But by that measure, things are going well. Part of that, but as Sandra said, there is always room for improvement. Part of what we want in order to promote the progress of science and useful arts is to make sure creators get compensated. You get rewarded for your work. And one thing.
So it's money.
That's part of it, yeah.
I mean, because money you control,
No, but that's why, we want to make, I think we all together want to make sure there's a healthy ecosystem, especially for new technologies like, music streaming services. And that those technologies and those services are put on a viable basis where they can increase and grow over the years. And I think in all of our optimum situation, instead of like one Pandora, in a few years it'll be 10 or 100 Pandoras, and musicians are getting compensated accordingly. I think we may agree, we may disagree on how to bring that about, but that's where we're all trying to get.
Well, Jay, your members, they've taken some funny views lately about doing business through ASCAP or BMI and these services that Michael's talking about. He sees them thriving. Obviously, there are some concerns. For you, copyright, is it broken or is it working the way it is?
Depends where you're sitting. I think that if you ask different people in this industry, Michael spoke about there's more music than ever. If your goal with copyright is that it doesn't matter whether it is made by a professional musician or an amateur musician, things are great. Music is everywhere, everything's doing well, but in reality, I think the artists are fed up with the copyright system right now. They feel like they're not getting the kind of really respect that they believe, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we haven't even really agreed upon what copyright is. There are many at this table who believe that copyright is an economic theory. Your thought about just providing incentive, and that's what the Founding Fathers wanted. And I'm not sure the Founding Fathers agreed on any of these points, so it's kind of tough to go back and talk about that. But there are others who believe it's a property interest, and there are others who believe it's a human right. And if you look at and you talk to independent artists, they feel like the DMCA has absolutely failed them. They don't have the resources to do the takedown notices. They basically feel that when they release a song today, it's gone. If somebody wants to pay for it, fine. If not, it's gone, meaning that they've turned themselves into a little tip jar kind of process. So from their standpoint, copyright's failed them. From the user standpoint, those who use the DMCA, it's kind of okay. They're doing well. What we're trying to do, basically, is to take what the lay of the land we have right now, which is that we have regulation on some of the copyrights, we have non-regulation on others, like on sound recordings. Certainly musical compositions are regulated a lot, We tried to get together with the stakeholders, maybe a little bit outside of the copyright system, and get to some kind of settlements on rates, on how we can get new services out there. That's going to be something that is kind of indicative of, yeah, it's broken to a certain extent, but we're going to fix it anyway outside of, quote unquote, the traditional copyright system. But I think we're always going to have these problems because we feel copyright is different. And that's going to be, it's where you're sitting, depending upon whether you think copyright is broken or not broken.
Well, a lot of those to whom you are of service, Michael Drexler is as well. And he is sitting in a different place, so maybe he has a different view if it depends upon where you are sitting. So Michael, copyright, is it broken? Is it broken from BMI's perspective, from your members' perspective? And if you would, comment a bit on why some of them seem to be withdrawing rights, if only temporarily, to negotiate.
Sure, I don't think it's broken. I think there's some cracks. I think there's some disconnects. If you look at, various service offerings, you look at comparables, obviously, between the record label payments and the non-regulated markets versus regulated markets, there's certainly disconnects there. There's 3 PROs in the US. Contrary to popular belief, BMI is not a monopoly. We're, if anything, an oligopoly, and we're moving towards a free market, it seems. And in a free market, maybe we should rethink our regulatory restraints. I mean, as you may know, BMI, as does ASCAP, operates under a consent decree, which basically cuffs their hands to a certain degree. We have to make sure that we treat similarly situated parties the same. For decades, obviously the question is how do you define that? We can say no. If somebody comes to us asking for a license, we have to say yes. If we can't agree on a rate, the only mechanism we have is to resolve it in rate court, which is a very lengthy, very expensive process. And within that ecosystem, I think we're creating value for our members as best we can. For example, in digital, we've doubled revenues in the last 3 years, which I think is a success story. And we are creating value for our affiliates. We're exploring new markets, and we're actually quite happy where we are today. So we'll see what the publisher withdrawal will bring. Obviously, there's now new market precedents that may be introduced into rate courts, and at the end of the day, they may benefit all of us.
Les, certainly your clients at Music Reports are involved in this same ecosystem, wanting rights from BMI and from publishers, some of them who are Jay's members and so forth. Do you share their opinion on copyright and where it's at as regards being broken or not, and how it suits its purpose in today's society?
Well, I mean, one of the misperceptions about us really, Jim, is that we exclusively represent copyright users, which is really not true. They've just heretofore been the entities who are willing to hire us, unlike BMI or some of the, you guys may actually be a for-profit organization. Right?
We're for-profit, or we act as a non-for-profit.
Right. We charge fees for services. That's what we do, and
a lot of our member companies do the same thing.
and
everyone in the room could identify with the possibility of fluctuating between for-profit and non-profit. Certainly lawyers have that concern as well.
But we're really agnostic as to who is our client, who's paying our fees, what kinds of rights we represent. Mainly, we believe in marketplace solutions, and we're just now seeing, I think, some very interesting experimentation in the marketplace when it comes to licensing, with publishers deciding to directly license their rights, or independent record labels deciding to directly license their rights to SiriusXM, which is something we've helped facilitate. So I think one of the things I don't like about the question, is it broken, is it suggests, well, we should do something. Let's legislate. Let's regulate. And we just don't think. We think it's very early to do that. Actually, in the scheme of things. I mean, some of us have been doing this stuff. I personally have worked in digital music since 1996, 7. I worked at Sony Music. I tried to get a locker service off the ground, very much like what Amazon, and Apple iTunes have recently done. So. It's really, we're in a nascent stage of things. We're seeing some interesting experimentation, again, being driven by the parties who can do it, which is the rights holders who control the rights to license. And I think we have to let that play out and see what results from that. And and like you, I think, we're going to see some very interesting competition in rights management. And the objective should be to create a frictionless, competitive marketplace for rights. And it may take some time, but I think we can get to that. I think the basic framework allows for that result.
Darryl, so you at LyricFind have gone out and negotiated for rights, if I'm correct here. And you want full coverage, I would guess, like an advertiser. You want to reach the entire market. You want the lyrics for every song, I presume. And so you've diligently, I know you to have gone out and diligently sought these rights and to have secured many of them. Could you share your experience with the pit, as it were, and your fellow panelists?
I think the big thing for us was, some background. At this point, we've done about 3,000 publishing deals for lyrics rights, which was something that nobody had asked for those rights on a mass scale before. Everything was sort of done as a one-off because somebody wanted to put lyrics in a book or they wanted to quote one particular thing. So nobody had come to the publishers and said that we want to license everything, your entire catalog. So that was a big hurdle for us at the beginning, was just the educational process of selling the publishers on the fact that there was a real market there and that they should let us try to monetize it for them, and also whether or not they could even grant those rights. But even after getting over that, then the issue becomes the fragmented nature of publishing ownership, where you have situations like, I think the song Rich Girl by Gwen Stefani has 14 different publishers that own a piece of it. Les might know that one more, or something like that. And there's others that are just like that. And technically you have to have all of those publishers signed up to use that track. And it becomes very, very difficult to actually move things forward and actually create usage and create that market when even with us with 3,000 publishers signed up, there's still a huge number more, and those unsigned ones can own a little piece of a track, and that can cause you to not be able to use it.
But you could get any one of them to grant you a license and pay them a chunk of change and have them pay all the others. And I know what you're going to say. If you pay them enough, they will do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point. The services typically want costless administration, and it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, you have a challenge in business. I get that. But traditionally, music distributors have not had that.
I just want to help the audience through what you just described, just to be clear. That though Darryl says, well, I've got 14 possible, or in fact, maybe they are actually all owners of a piece of this song. Yeah. And I need to get all 14 of them, he says, in order to use what I want to use. But Les, you're saying, no, you don't.
The framework of the Copyright Act allows something
but
different.
That's U.S. only. The joint authorship doctrine only exists in the U.S. We're operating in 30 countries right now.
Okay. Well,
so
that's certainly different.
We may as well just shoot ourselves in the head.
Well, now, I'm going to guess copyright's broken for you because this is the kind of solution you're thinking about. In Virginia, we'd make it easy, and in New York, it's very hard.
I didn't mean to contradict you. I'm just, these are radical times. I mean, these,
Well, it didn't sound radical at the beginning of this panel.
More experimentation, not less. And there are many things like that the Copyright Act allows, and they're just not, they just haven't been explored.
Why not? Why do you think
Largely because the rights owners have been reluctant to experiment.
Yeah,
and that's because the economic pressures haven't been great enough for them to feel the need to experiment.
And the rights owners, when we're doing deals with them, generally only want to grant the portion that they control. They don't want to be responsible for something under joint authorship and then be themselves on the hook for distributing the remainder of that ownership percentage. So trying to get them to accept the rest of the payment and grant a full license rather than just their share is very, very difficult.
We'll get the license grant from them and then hire us or BMI to pay everybody. Get 100% license and get us to pay the,
Well, that's if you know everybody.
Well, right, but that's...
There might not be a situation where you might not even know who all of the rights owners are, and to have one rights owner take the money, and it's the same problem. You don't know who to pay. Now the rights owner has money of not knowing who to pay. So while the copyright law does allow this principle, I think that as a practical matter, it's got a lot of problems with it.
Are you kidding me? We don't know who owns these things?
No,
Well,
there's
the hit
there's
song
lots
might
of
work.
stuff that
Actually-
people don't know. And to use a current example, the song "Suit and Tie" by Justin Timberlake, that the publishing on that is owned by Sony, and I believe the other part is Universal, but they haven't agreed between them what the split is yet. So we know who owns it, but we just don't know who owns how much.
Do what the record companies have always done, just put the money in reserve.
Well, we do. For those situations where we know we have licenses from both of those publishers, then we'll use it and escrow it and wait for them to figure it out so that they don't miss out on that revenue.
Boil them
now.
all down pro rata, right? And then, pay it out when it gets settled. I mean, I think on the well-known songs, Jay, the Fox agency, BMI, or us could tell you who are the rights owners on your example. And the truth is, as much as we talk about the long tail and all of that, there's 200,000, 300,000 tracks that people want to listen to. And the copyright information on that stuff is actually pretty well known and gets resolved because there's a financial incentive to resolve it.
So you're saying 200, 300,000 tracks out of what? What do you guess, worldwide? 50 to
Well,
100
U.S.,
million?
I'm talking about U.S.
Okay.
iTunes has what, 25, 30 million?
Yeah.
Most
Many
of
of
it
which
doesn't
see
get
no
used.
usage whatsoever.
But we've got Colin Rushing here. And Colin, instead of dealing with publishers, is dealing with sound recording owners. And there's a quirk in the law where there's a compulsory license that you administer. Why don't you tell the audience about that? And I think the results that I think speak for themselves, the money that's coming in.
Sure. So I don't know how familiar people in the audience are with SoundExchange and the license that we administer. So SoundExchange is an organization that represents recording artists and record labels, and we do so in this sort of odd niche in copyright law, which relates to the digital performance of sound recordings. And the reason that that particular niche exists is that, unlike on the composition side, which is what Les and the others have been talking about, where there's a broad performance right, on sound recordings it's really limited to digital transmissions, so digital radio like Pandora and Sirius XM, on-demand streaming like Spotify. So in that world, record labels and recording artists have a performance right, which means that they're entitled to be paid when their uses are performed digitally. When Congress created this new right in 1995, Congress said, okay, for on-demand, for things that are, what are called interactive, we're going to require the services or the users of the music to go and get permission to directly from the rights owner. But for digital radio, for stuff that was what the law calls non-interactive, but which now includes custom radio like Pandora, Congress said we're going to create a compulsory license. And what that means is that for digital radio services like Pandora and Sirius XM, they don't have to get permission from individual record companies to use the recordings. They just have to go through a collective, through a single point of contact. And so as a practical matter, they send these services, large and small, ranging in size from Pandora and Sirius XM down to college radio stations, send a single check to SoundExchange, basically a list of what they've played, and then it's our job to divide that money up. 50% to the rights owner, whoever it is, usually a record company, but increasingly artists themselves, and then 50% to artists. Most of it to the featured artist, a percentage to a fund for distribution to non-featured artists. So this all sort of happens from the service provider's side more or less seamlessly. They send a single check to us, and it's our job to figure out who the right person is to pay. And the growth has been extraordinary. I think in 2005 we distributed something like $20 million. Last year we distributed $462 million. That's out the door, and so that doesn't, and there's obviously some money that we're always having to work on because the data is so poor. Comes in, it's not always obvious who to pay.
How much is that
How much is what?
in reserve total?
Did somebody say a lot? It is a lot because it's essentially let's call it roughly, I don't know the precise numbers, for every dollar that comes in, it's roughly around 80% that goes out right away. And then the rest, the other, we just continue to work on over time. What the exact balance is at any given time is sort of an accounting question. If you look at our 990, it reports a figure of around $300 million. But what that includes, it actually includes money that's in the pipeline. In other words, money that we've received but is going to go out in the next quarter. It includes money that we haven't even received yet because it's as of December 31st of the year. We accrue based on the royalty period. We don't get money for the year until 45 days afterwards, and so we're still collecting money for 2012 right now. That goes into that number. It includes money for, there's some number of foreign artists and domestic artists who haven't registered yet. That number, which is sort of, somewhere what is sometimes called our sort of unpayable balance, is a relatively small fraction of the total bank balance. It's a balance it's a figure we're always trying to work on and drive down, and we have a team of people that are focused entirely on outreach, on data cleanup, and just working to make sure that everything gets out as quickly as possible. But it's a reality of these systems that there's some money that ends up sort of hard to place. One thing we have not done that the law gives us the right to do is to conduct what's called a pool release, or a distribution of unclaimed royalties. We haven't done it except once 5 or 6 years ago. Since then, we've still continued to work on driving that balance down.
What exactly is a pool release?
I think it's otherwise known as the black
Yeah.
box, if I'm being
Divided
fair
up
here.
based on other people's usage.
Well, and here's how it works at SoundExchange, and I don't know so essentially, if we ever were to do that, it wouldn't be literally checks cut to people. It would be applied to what the regulations say is that if there are royalties that go unclaimed, after 3 years, you're permitted to use them to offset your administrative costs, right? And so the way that SoundExchange operates is by taking a relatively small percentage of the royalty stream to keep the lights on. So if we use unclaimed royalties to sort of pay that down, it basically increases everyone else's
Use the numbers.
payment.
What percentage of 100% does SoundExchange use to fund its operations?
It's less than 6%.
I think that's an admirable rate. Now,
But wait, that's, you guys express your admin rate a function of your costs over your collections in a year, not your distributions, right? That 6%
That's right.
figure. So what is it when you compare your costs over your distributions?
But it's actually not true. So the way that it works, so we calculate our admin, you're right, it's a percentage of costs over collections. That's how we come up with a number.
Right. I
But the
don't
number that
doubt
we-
that you're
but the
collecting a
number
ton.
that we-
How much is going out?
But the number that we apply to the distributions is that percentage.
Really? I mean, that's not the way it's described in your financial statements, but.
I disagree.
well, that's one we can take up. I doubt we'll settle it here and
Yeah.
now. One number I heard that I found shocking was that only 5% of the time do you know the ISRC code of the song that was used, or the sound recording that was used. And so a lot of what you're describing is a matching process of names and titles of songs and trying to
Yeah.
figure out whose that is. But by all means, we have nothing like a vehicle identification
Right.
number that's getting used most of the
Yeah,
time.
the metadata in this space is an absolute disaster. And one of the things that's incredible is there is this numbering system called ISRC, which
And
is,
by the way, ISWC for songs as well, if I'm right.
and it's supposed to be a unique identifier for sound recordings. And yet, when the data that comes into SoundExchange from the services, I think 5% of the time that field is populated, and it's often wrong. And so we've found it historically to be unreliable. One of the things that we're working on at SoundExchange now in a way to sort of try to help remedy this is an authoritative repertoire database, something that can be a resource for the industry as well as for us to help sort of sort through this problem. It's a real challenge. We'll have the same sound recording reported to us 20 or 30 different ways. And the other thing is without ISRC, there are lots of different recordings of the same song, may have the same title, may even be the same artist. They're actually different recordings, often owned by different people. This is really important stuff. And sort of when you're talking about a couple 100,000 tracks, that's fine. You know, you can sort of sort through that through brute force. But we live in a world of millions of tracks, and we have this massive long tail that we're having to sort through. And so the great operational challenge that the whole industry faces is around metadata. So I guess this ties back to the question, is copyright broken? I think there are some important gaps in the law that are worth talking about, like the fact that over-the-air radio doesn't pay recording artists. But in terms of the systems that exist, I mean, what needs to be repaired is this metadata system. And that's something that we, and I know others at this table, are working on. That's more important now than it ever has been. And it's not just the long tail, it's also the variety of services that are out there, and just the amount of money that's coming in from all of these different sources. And the only way to make sure that goes to the right place is if everyone is identifying things the same way.
It seems elementary to me. I mean, I'm told that writing was devised as a means of enumerating property, that the enumeration of property is an essential element of the law whenever one wishes for there to be respect of property rights. And so it's somewhat shocking that there are no registries, and yet under the law, under the Berne Convention, this I think is one inherent feature of copyright as we know it, is that registration is voluntary.
Yeah.
Does anybody have an opinion on why that might be, why it's voluntary?
Well, it's a TRIPS requirement, isn't it, or something like that?
Yes, but
it's a treaty issue.
In the
but
year 2013, why would it be that
I don't think it can
one
be.
has to register property like a house or a car in order to see them respected, but that we have no absolute registration system for that which we wish to be treated as property?
Well, maybe what makes more sense, a variety, I mean, these guys have a registry at SoundExchange, you guys have your registry, we have a registry, NMPA Fox has a registry. Right. Maybe what makes sense is more cooperation among companies that already manage registries. You know, when we always kind of smile when we hear talk about what the global repertoire database in itself will do. I mean, databases.
Well, the GRD, the Global Repertoire Database, is for publishers and songwriters, right?
A laudable initiative.
I was there 2 weeks ago in London, looking over their shoulders at the offices of Deloitte and Touche.
Databases in themselves don't do anything, right? And historically, these database initiatives, let's just say it, have not been very successful. Now, maybe times have changed, but I understand the GRD initiative has now gone from what, 75 people to like 150 people?
Well, there's a lot of people there working.
The point it leads to is that when you talk about databases, what you're really talking about is organizations that have to be governed and funded and operated somehow. And so what it ultimately leads to is, again, some layer of cost in administration. Somebody's got to pay for those 150 people who are doing that good work to try and determine who owns the copyrights, particularly challenging in where there's a dynamic secondary market for publishing rights, right?
Right.
So
And
I think, databases alone, it's a great idea, but it's half of the solution.
And looking at it from the actual rights holder's perspective, and particularly the perspective of an individual who doesn't necessarily have the legal resources and the administrative resources to manage their portfolio, especially if it's somebody like a photographer or potentially a songwriter who has a large volume of works, each of which might have a small individual value or an unpredictable value at the time that the work is created. If you put a registration burden on those individuals, you're really causing an administrative burden that presents challenges where the person may lose their property rights altogether because of a technical error or a mistake, a failure to properly fill out the information that needs to be submitted.
How
either
big
on
is
their
that
side
burden
or on-
really, though? If I'm a songwriter and I write an album's worth of songs, is it really going to take me that long to file a registration,
So
like
artists,
fill out a
artists
form?
aren't good at things
Right.
like registration. Let's just go ahead and
Exactly,
say
and
it.
you're
I mean,
talking about a songwriter in that instance. There may be the joint ownership issue, but think about also photographers, for instance. If I'm a photographer, I may be taking thousands of images for any particular job that I shoot. And it's not clear at the time that I'm shooting those images which of those images may ultimately be the image of value and may be the image that gets infringed. And the copyright law already provides pretty harsh remedies in terms of not allowing you to have statutory damages as a rights holder at your disposal if you fail to register a work. And that is tantamount actually to taking away the right of a individual rights holder to actually enforce their copyright, because and I'm dealing with a person in my grassroots network right now who has this situation where her image was infringed actually by a big fashion house, used on a design for clothing, and also used on a tote bag. She's a young photographer, had just started, started her business. It was one of a number of images. She hadn't registered that particular image before it was infringed. She doesn't have a history of licensing to fashion houses, so she can't demonstrate what the licensing fee would have been for the use of the image for that particular type of a use. So she really has no potential for recovering any damages in this case. So she can't, and it takes a federal, copyright case to enforce her rights. So there's, nobody that will take on her case, because you can't get any relief whatsoever.
The tough part is Darryl wants to pay. I mean,
yeah,
in this
no,
particular
and that's the
example.
thing. Like, I love the fact that actually you are going and doing the right thing and trying to find the solutions, and I appreciate your suggestions.
The rights owners want to collect on
finding
100% of
creative-
the songs, not just the registered and the known songs.
Well, I hear now, by the way, in Europe, the claim was Apple, Amazon, and Nokia said that they were receiving invoices for 130%.
130%. And if you asked all the publishers in the U.S. their market share, you'd get to a number that's that high or higher.
Yeah.
So I mean, the point is, when you commit collection and licensing exclusively to organizations represented and owned and controlled by rights owners, they're going to want the rub of the green whenever they can get it. And there will be instances when that money is not paid out. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
I think that there's something you're missing, though, and that is that if you're talking about what's broken, what's being fixed, in one of the CRBs in 2008, the Copyright Royalty Board rulings, there was for the first time a late fee. The fact that publishers now get a late fee from labels for not paying mechanicals, and your point before about what do you do when you have money and you don't know who to pay, you just put it into an account. Well, all of a sudden, when we had a late fee of 18% per annum, the labels stood up and said, wow, we got all this money that we don't know who to pay, and we're going to be hit with 18%, so what are we going to do? So what do? They say, here, take the money, and they say, well, how much money? Well, it's like a couple $100 million sitting in, because why? Because songwriters don't figure out the splits because of all the problems that are arranged, with publishers and with labels and the controlled composition clause in the record contracts, which makes it hard to resolve some of these issues. What happened from that late fee, which was a CRB ruling, is that we developed a plan and a program where we took this money, this black box money, we distributed it, the old money, to the publishers on a market share basis, and we imposed new best practices. And those best practices now help to resolve the issues of who to pay. So there you have a Copyright Royalty Board making a decision, and then the industry taking hold of it, and then doing something really good to solve this problem of who to pay. And I think that as we're seeing this, the black box money, the pending and unmatched money, has reduced by somewhere in the range of 80% since we started this process.
But
that,
Jay,
to me, is a fantastic movement forward.
It was a
to
great
get everyone paid.
It was a great initiative for the publishers, no doubt, and there never should have been that much money in reserve. I would suggest to you, if the major publishers and the major record companies hadn't shared common corporate ownership for 70% of the industry for however long, it never would have been possible. But when I just have to.
I'm not sure that's right.
Well,
Because
anyway,
I understand what you're saying.
the way in which the money was distributed was using the known copyright owners as a proxy
Exactly.
for distributions, even for the unknowns, which
Yes.
automatically necessarily results in an overpayment to the bigger publishers. right?
Exactly.
There-
There's a
there's-
fundamental error in using previous market share data to distribute unknown royalties.
Yes.
Because by definition, the stuff that is unknown and unmatched is likely not the popular stuff.
It's rough justice, and we always
You're
said
right.
it was rough justice. But at the end of the day.
Well, it's
we
screwing
rather
the smaller
have-
publishers in favor of the majors.
I'm not sure the smaller ones got screwed. I think that who got screwed, if you want to use that, I don't want to even use that term, who got screwed, but if there's anybody who has like taken been in a detriment to this situation, it's the guys who never finished their deals. Those are the people that were harmed. The people that really won are the guys that did their deals. So
Yeah,
that really, we were rewarding those people that should have done the right thing in the first place, and we were penalizing, to a certain extent, those people who didn't do what they were supposed to do, and that is sit down amongst 5 writers after you write a song and figure out who owns what. So I think that at the end of the day, the philosophy that we had was the right one, and I'll tell you, as far as songwriters and publishers go, I'd much rather see the money in our pocket and out with the publishers than sitting in some bank account at the 4 major labels in about $200 million. And we are continuing to get money every single quarter and distributing it to publishers based on market share, but we're updating the market share, we're
Yeah.
updating the data, and we're making it better and better, but that money's coming down.
Well, and I
Meaning
think that the way that you
licensing
did it
is
was
happening.
probably really the only way that you could do it.
Absolutely.
Well, I disagree with that. I think you could have spent more time on it and tried to do it on a full census basis.
Now
Publish-
that
Do more
Yeah.
research into the
Yes,
un-
it would have been
unknown
more
stuff.
costly, there's no doubt, and
For
it would have taken
30-year-old
more.
songs, that is just an impossibility.
Look,
It's
every,
I
every year
don't
or
disagree.
two, I hear that
It was
this is not a
expedient.
problem we're going to continue to have. People tell me technology has now enabled the facility with each individual song. And we will have little need in the future for societies that divide pools of money up. And yet, we continue to see those pools grow and those societies perform on a higher and higher level. And yet, very recently, we've seen Universal and Sony withdraw rights from some of the societies for purposes of negotiation. I believe they put them back in for administration. And this is raising a lot of eyebrows. So I'm wondering if you panelists could address this question of big copyright holders saying, no, I'm pulling out of the society, at least for the purposes of negotiating this payment.
Just for the record, sorry, just for the record, it's with Sony ATV
Yes?
/ EMI.
Yes.
So Universal hasn't withdrawn yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, right.
But we have heard they will. Yes.
Right, and the withdrawal is very, 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 very limited.
Yes.
It's digital rights only, and it's limited to certain uses only. I don't want to get into all the details, but it's a limited withdrawal, and it's really, right now, it looks like it's really about internet radio. It's about the disconnect between, the publisher payment and the record label payment.
And
Which
what
in
is
the
the
last
disconnect
year,
there?
it was a 12 to 1.
Colin's seen the money
you know.
grow. I mean, why not put it in his hands?
That's
That's a good idea.
That's not the
There it
we don't
is.
want them to-
But what is the disconnect?
There's a disconnect here, and the disconnect that you're talking about here is, first of all, everyone has the right to pull their collective rights out of a society. This is the deal you make. So that if it's not like you go to ASCAP and BMI and say, here, take my rights, and then when you want your rights back, somehow you're creating something new. Everybody has that right. In the compulsory licensing system, everybody has the right to go out and do direct licenses. The failure here and the problem is not that system. The failure here are the bodies setting the rates. You have a rate court that's up here under consent decrees that are the longest consent decrees in U.S. history that should be possibly going
How long?
away. Oh, you go back to the 30s and 40s. You've got a whole series of consent decrees that deal with these particular issues. They have a certain rate-setting process and standards that are different than sound exchanges. You guys have it great. You guys got a willing buyer, willing seller standard rate, and I love that. And I promoted it when I was with SoundExchange and I was with the artist, and it was a fantastic thing. We don't have that. Publishers under the compulsory license system has a different standard, and different factors are brought into it. And then you have the rate court up here, which can't even take into account SoundExchange's situation, with the valuation different, where you have the sound recording side of what Pandora pays 10 times as much as the publishing side of what Pandora pays. This is a problem of courts. And if you want to talk about what's possibly broken and needs to be fixed, that is the way to fix it. Now, the Chaffetz bill which came out, and this was, you know.
That is the Internet Radio
That is the
Fairness
Internet
Act.
Radio Fairness Act. The idea was, let's equalize all these standards, but they want to take it down to a standard that's lower than what you're at right now, and I don't understand how anybody would think that anything but fair market value is where it should be. So I think that we're all fighting these issues in Congress, and we're going to get the rate court, I think, issues resolved, but that's the problem, and that is why they're taking those rights away. They think they can get a better rate, and they can get a better deal outside of the rate court system.
And they're saying they are getting that, yes.
And they do,
They
and
are.
conveniently, then BMI argues that should be the a benchmark
It's not
for
convenient. Why is
establishing the
it convenient? I
blanket.
mean, that's a
No,
market
that's-
precedent.
Well,
That should absolutely
it's a
be
little
benchmark.
convenient.
And we have one new benchmark. Let's see
They
what
exercise
happens.
significant
Mike,
control over it.
That's
But
the
look-
way it's supposed to
Should the
work.
government
Hey,
step
in a
into
way-
all this?
Yeah.
I mean, do your members want the government to step
is
in?
involved.
No.
The good news is we agree on the problem. I think the bad news is we may disagree on the solution.
Exactly,
Look,
right.
I'm not going to take the audience on a tour through the last 20 years of copyright law. You're welcome. But well, just suffice it to say that it's kind of this Rube Goldberg type contraption that's been like tacked together and added together, and it's going all over the place. As it currently stands, the way it works is if you're a broadcast over-the-air radio station, you're playing music, you pay nothing. If you're cable
To the artist.
or to the artist,
Yes.
if you're streaming music and you're a cable station, and you're a satellite station, all right, cable technology or satellite technology, you're paying around 8%. If you're Pandora, you're paying about 50% of your revenues in royalties. Now, you may look at me and you say, that does not seem like a viable business. And you're right. The result of that is that Pandora currently has about 75% of the streaming radio market. Right now, I love Pandora, but they don't just have 75% because they're good. They have 75% because as an investor, as an entrepreneur, it would be nuts to get into this business under the current copyright law. So what the Chaffetz bill, which we like, would do is simply ensure that, that the royalties for Pandora and internet streaming services are determined by the same context, the same parameters that cable and satellite are determined by. Just simply equalize it. The issue is that this often turns into a debate about, well, should Pandora pay at X rate or should Pandora pay at Y rate? We can have a good debate around that at this table. The real question is, do you want internet streaming services around in 5 years? Because they're not making money. And what history and basic economics shows is that if you got a business segment that's not making money, it goes away. That's how it works. And right now, if I could just add, you have Pandora is paying hundreds of millions of dollars to you and to artists. Pandora is paying, artists that you've never heard of, unless you're a hip hop head, artists like French Montana, 6 figures. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. You got a business that's licensing the music, it's doing the right thing. After years of people saying you can't compete with free, they're competing with free and they're trying to make it work. But unless the current context changes, businesses like that are not going to be viable businesses. So what I hope we can all around this table agree on is, number one, we want businesses like that to be around and to expand, so you have this healthy music ecosystem. And number two, what do you have to do to make that happen, as opposed to just like taking the golden goose and just shaking the thing?
Well, I think, though, that there's an issue here about when you say that you want Pandora to exist. There is a viewpoint out there, and especially, not from artists are doing well through SoundExchange. There's no doubt about it. From songwriters and publishers, there's a different viewpoint. They look at this and they think, well, maybe Pandora just isn't a good business model. Maybe they should be figuring out how to make more money in different ways. And when you talk to people in the music industry and say, oh, 50% or 60% of the revenue goes to the content owners, talk to the guys that are doing live performances. The companies that make a 10% profit margin after they're done. They survive because they figured out a business model to do it. So it's not just a matter of we're all out there saying that Pandora should survive. We want Pandora to survive as a good business model that will give a living wage to songwriters as well as artists. Artists are doing okay. There's no doubt about it. You ask managers where their money's coming from, they're saying, well, Apple first and SoundExchange second. That's what most managers would say. Songwriters, that's not the case.
Okay, but
we are being impoverished effectively.
But let's
to a
talk
large extent.
about the fairness side of it. And To date, I have yet to hear a really convincing argument for why there is such a disparity in the rates paid across different platforms. Why is it fair that Pandora pays 50+%, Sirius pays 8%, and other people pay nothing? And people can argue about what the right rate is and if they're generating enough money, but why is there this disparity between the platforms?
Can I address
talk to
that?
that.
I'll just add,
SoundExchange
John
can
Kennedy
talk.
said that some men go to war and some men stay home, and others are wounded and some are killed. Life is unfair.
Well, I don't know where to go from that. But I mean, so let me speak to the disparity in the rate. So first of all, the fact that over-the-air radio doesn't pay, I think almost everyone, if not everyone at this table, agrees that that doesn't make any sense at all. It's this weird anachronism in the law. It's unfair, and it's a product of politics. So we'll put that.
I'm Canadian. We pay there.
I know,
right.
but the rates are very low. In terms of Pandora, their rate is not 50% of revenue. I just want to make that clear. It's not a 50% of revenue rate. The rate is a usage-based floor, which you have got to have with webcasting because it's very easy to set up a webcasting service that reaches millions and millions and millions of people that doesn't have any business plan in place. And we've seen that happen time and time again. It's a usage-based floor against 25% of revenue. Pandora as a business, and I'm a fan of the company and the people there. I mean, they're friends of ours. We love what they're doing for artists. I love what they're doing for music. They're fairly upfront about saying, their focus is on building their audience. Their focus is on convincing traditional radio advertisers, hey, I'm a radio station. Treat me like a radio station. That's the fight they're taking. And they're looking at this $15 billion a year advertising market that exists for traditional radio, and they're saying, hey, I'm 8% of radio right now. I should have a much bigger percentage of the ad market that's out there. And I think they are making great strides. I mean, their chief revenue officer, John Trimble, a few weeks ago made the point that, look, our focus recently has been on building our audience, getting advertisers to think about us as like traditional radio. He even said we have been close to the inflection point of profitability a couple times. We'll get there again. It makes sense. I mean, you look at the other internet giants. I mean, they operated for years and years in the red.
But you're not addressing the disparity in the rates between the platforms. You're just saying that they're not calculated as a percentage. Fine, okay. Why isn't Sirius paying a per stream rate?
Well, because Sirius
So
on a
that's
gross
historic.
revenue
Because you
basis
can't
is
measure
paying
it
more
the
than,
same way.
well, they're paying more than any
It's-
company in the world.
Sure,
for sound recording royalties.
That's actually not true. But the
Who pays more?
in
In the U.S.?
What's that?
In the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you just put the public numbers side by side, I think Sirius is no longer the largest source of sound recording royalties.
I think Pandora may catch them, but I don't think they're there yet.
Well, the numbers are what they are. I might know
They're
them
both
better
big.
than you.
Sirius is public and Pandora's are too.
The basically, so Sirius's rate is set under this different rate standard. We think the rates are too low. I mean, we think they're way too low. And the fact is that, they're the $3 to $4 billion a year company. People sign up for Sirius XM because of the music. And, if it wasn't for the music, they would have no business at all. They have this amazing subscription business. Yeah, and we think music is not getting its fair share of that. Sirius XM is half non-music. So if you want to sort of try to do an apples to apples, and you can look at the various market rates that the courts have looked at. But one of the things that has happened is under this below market rate standard, the Copyright Royalty Board has specifically said, all right, the market's about here, but we're going to set the rate down here because we're worried about disrupting this tiny little satellite company, which has grown to become this behemoth in the industry. And, it's unfair. It's just a question of which way how to fix that inequity.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue both ways of which way it should be corrected.
Well, you can't lose sight of the fact that, the top line rate, the amount paid in, is radically different from the amount that ultimately gets distributed to the rights holders too, right? I mean, there is a big difference. And in our experience, there's a tremendous amount of inefficiency. In fact, a lot of money that's collected that doesn't get paid. And with respect to Sirius at least, with respect to companies that chose to directly license Sirius, meaning not licensed through SoundExchange, we have a lot of, virtually, I think, 100 independent labels now, and they're making more money because they're getting paid directly.
Well, and one reason for that is that they're getting the artist share.
That is true.
That is right. But there's another issue here, too, and this gets back to why are the companies pulling their rights? Why are they pulling? It's because Congress is gridlock. It's because you can't really get things done easily in Congress, and I think the companies are fed up with waiting for Congress to come in and equalize the rates and equalize the difference between the sound recording owners and the music publishers and the songwriters. So they're trying to go out into the music market itself, set these metrics, and bring it back to the courts, not to Congress, to the courts. They see this as this is what BMI thinks. Del Bryant released a letter the other day saying exactly this point, is that, yes, we believe that some companies are leaving us for a moment, but once the system gets back to a point where those metrics equal what's going on in the marketplace with these companies that withdraw their rights, then you've got your somewhat of a solution. It's the old saying in Washington, it's a hell of a lot easier to kill a bill than to pass one. And this Chaffetz bill, I can guarantee you right now, it's not going to pass. And neither will the Nadler bill and probably a lot of other bills out there that are going to come down the road. But the idea of manipulating, and it is a manipulation of the court system, that's a viable thing, and that's what BMI and ASCAP are doing right
So
now.
that's one
Those companies are
aspect
pulling it
in,
back.
right, that's one aspect in the equivalent to your artists not getting paid directly. In the publishing world, BMI and ASCAP and CSAC are paying writers directly. So there's no funky business. There's 50%
Yes, that is true.
gets paid to the publisher, 50% gets paid to the writer. With the publishers pulling out, we don't really know what's going to happen with the writer share.
Well,
But
that's going to have to be the last
So-
word, unfortunately. Like music money for copyright, we've gone 130% over our allotted time for the panel. But you've been a great panel. I mean, I think the most we could do is address the question of whether the system is broken, but getting on to solutions, I think, takes a great deal more time.
Yes, it does.
But I'm going to ask you to do one last thing, each one of you, and that is provide your email address to the audience such that they could know how to get in touch with you if any of them wants to. So, Colin?
Sure. So it's crushing@soundexchange.com or crushing at soundexchange.com.
Crushing.
I set you up for that.
At SoundExchange.com. Sandra, could you give them your email address?
Excellent.
Yeah, it's sastars@copyrightalliance.org.
Yes, and that's AISTARS. Darryl.
I'm just Darryl at LyricFind.com, not LyricFind. And you can spell it in all different ways. They all end up going to me because everybody spells it wrong.
Michael.
Smart move. M. Drexler, MDREXLER, @BMI.com.
Les.
It's L. Watkins at musicreports.com.
Michael Petricone. I got it right.
Michael P. at ce.org.
Jake.
J. Rosenthal, just J, not J-A-Y, at nmpa.org. But if you're looking for money, contact HFA.
Well, I'm very appreciative to the seven of you. You've done a fine job, I think, highlighting the problems with the system. Solutions will be something that await another day. And we thank you as an audience for being patient and helping us through these very thorny issues.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks.
Good fun.